Willie. We're in lockdown here in New Zealand, so we've got a couple of weeks to kill some time. Perfect opportunity to upgrade the turbo on our Toyota Celica GT4 rally car. Now we currently have a Gen 4 3S GTE with the factory turbo, and it's actually done us really well. It handles anti-lag, it handles lots of boost, but it's getting a bit old now, so we're going to upgrade. Of course, the first step is to remove the old turbo. So this is the new snail here. This is a Borgwarner EFR 6758. These turbos apparently are magic in terms of how they spool and the power they can make. The cool thing about them is all the features you get with them. So we get an internal wastegate, we have an integrated blow-off valve, integrated boost controller, a stainless exhaust housing so it won't rust, all in a nice compact package. So with a rally car we need to run a restrictor here in New Zealand. This is just for rally events, but for hill climbs and gravel sprints you don't need a restrictor. The reason we've chosen this turbo is it should do both restricted and unrestricted very good. So it should have the response of a factory turbo with a restrictor, but with a restrictor out it should make around 500 horsepower, which is what we want. So the next job is to find a place for the turbo inside the engine bay. So what we're going to do is take off anything which might get in the way. So this doesn't have to go here. So we're going to take off this boost solenoid actuator. Sorry, boost solenoid. Now it's recommended with these turbos that we don't use the original actuator. It's only a single port. The recommendation is go for a twin port Turbo Smart actuator. The idea behind this is it's got pressure going on top and bottom of the diaphragm, so we can run a much wider range of pressure, as well as keep the wastegate closed before it reaches the desired boost pressure. So we're going to go ahead and swap that over. Well, we've learned something today that we have a different size thread. This looks like a metric thread and this looks like an imperial thread. So we're going to have to find a nut on there at some point, but for now we won't worry about it. So we'll take this over to the car. So I've already clocked this compressor housing around to where I think I might like it. So there's numerous things we need to consider and where to mount it. We've obviously got the shape and design of the manifold. We've also got to think about where our exhaust's going to go, and especially in terms of the heat management. So obviously there's a lot of heat coming out of both the manifold and the downpipe, and we don't want that anywhere that's going to be heat sensitive. As well as that, we've obviously got our intake pipe and our outlet. So with this setup here we've got the intercooler down here, and I don't really want to change it because we've found it to work really well. So the original turbo sits just here, and my thoughts are to keep it in this place and not move it, but there's other things to consider. it can obviously go around the other way. The main advantage of this is it takes our exhaust away from our alternator over there. This will make the intercooler piping and the intake maybe less elegant, and of course more out of the box solutions we should also consider. It could go off around here, sit on top of the gearbox. You see some setups where they sit further down and they have a different radiator intercooler setup. They usually sit in the place of a radiator. I don't really want to do that. I want to keep this size radiator because it works really well, and this general setup I quite like. So I think we'll probably go back to plan A, which is going to be just here. So the main issue I have with this is how close our exhaust is going to get to our alternator down there. So it is possible to move that alternator up into this area here, which is actually where it originally was. I've moved it down there mostly for weight distribution, to get the weight lower down as well as tidy up the engine bay. So the main problem we have here is actually this actuator, which sort of right gets in the way of the gearbox. So it's just a matter of playing around where we think it's going to work best, and I think we'll probably get away with that just there. It's just going to mean a very tight downpipe, possibly have to do some pie cuts, some lobster back as some people call it, which isn't ideal because we want a nice free flowing downpipe, but with anything like this there's always compromises to make. So the main problem we've got here is that the internal gate, as convenient as it is actually being my downfall at the moment, and this gets in the way of basically where I want it. This fouls the gearbox. So what I'm going to do is make a custom bracket and slide this back a bit. We can only go so far, we don't want to get this too close to the housing, but if we can slide this back another 20mm, then that'll make my life a lot easier. So we've made our new bracket here for the wastegate actuator. See, this is the original one, which is perfectly good, and then we had to play around with some cardboard to get all the right angles and mock one up, and here is our finished article, like magic. And as we can see between them, this offsets the actuator by about 20mm. It's just a piece of bent up 3mm stainless steel with a gusset welded in. Pretty simple, but a fair bit of time to muck around and get it right. So we've got a mock up here of how the turbo is going to go. So I've welded these two supports here to the turbo flange, and we've got it sitting nicely where we want it. It's quite a time consuming process to get this exactly right, and once we've done that we can start looking and thinking about how our runners are going to go from here to here. So there's several considerations we need to take in. I want the best spool and response possible, so we want to keep our runners short for two reasons. Obviously it's less distance for the exhaust pulses to travel, but also the bigger the manifold, the more heat that gets lost out of it. The heat is pretty helpful for spinning the turbocharger, and the more heat that goes into the turbocharger is the less heat we've got in the engine bay heating everything else up. So we've got a twin scroll turbo here, and so with an inline 4 we want to take the two outside ones to one scroll and the two inside ones to the other scroll. So effectively we've only got two options here of how it's going to go. So we can take these two and bring them to there, and then these two come to here. Or the other way we could do it is to bring the outside ones to this one and the inside ones over to this one. Ideally what we want to do is keep the runners to an equal length. It's not critical, but I like the idea of it, and it should make it sound quite good with the runners being equal length. So these are the bends we're going to be using. There is a long radius. These are 1.25" stainless. So we want to use stainless for the anti-corrosive properties, and we've got a thick wool here, so that means no cracking. And as long as we use a quality welding filler wire, this should last a very long time. So we'll have a play around and see how things go together, and there's a lot of head scratching involved, but I have a plan coming to mind, and I'll show you when we've made some more progress. Alright, so we've mocked up our first couple of runners here. We can see they're not quite equal length. To get these equal length, it'll need a massive extravagant set of runners, which I don't really want. So there's no real science to doing this. What I do is I start off and I cut up a bunch of various size bends out of our supplied bends, and that gives us a good starting point. So we see here we come out of there. So with the Toyota, it's got oval ports, so we give it a squish and then lay them out. So we can see here we've got an extra wide port here, so we're going to need to cut it back here and do a bit of shaping to get that in smoothly. And in terms of the runner length, these ones will be slightly shorter than this one, but these have to come over top, and so by the time we do that, they should all be roughly the equal length. So we can see now we've got all 4 runners mocked up, and it's at the point where I'm really happy with it. So now we're at the stage where we're going to fully weld it. So before we fully weld it, we need to think ahead and be very strategic about the order in which each bit is welded. So we can't actually get to each bit that needs to be welded while it's all together like this. So what we're going to do is weld everything we can get to, except for a few strategic welds, and then pull it apart, and then weld the bits we can't, and then put it back together, and then finish off the last few welds. You can see here we'll put it on a jig. This is for 2 reasons. One is to keep the flanges perfectly stable and solid. Whenever we weld anything, it's always going to pull to some extent. The second reason for the jig is if we ever make another one, it makes it a lot easier. I do plan on advertising and selling these if there's demand. And what we're also going to do with this manifold is purge it. So that means we run gas on the inside of the pipes. I don't think this is 100% necessary, but if we want the best reliability and durability, then it's definitely the thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and weld this up. We've got the manifold fully welded up. Pretty happy with it. What we need to do next is get the flanges nice and flat. So I've attempted to put this on my linisher and get it a bit flatter, but unfortunately the linishing face isn't quite long enough. So what we're going to do is take it to the machinist, and he's going to get it nice and flat on a proper machine. You can see here we've started doing a bit of blending and smoothing these edges. So what I've done here is weld on the inside to add a bit more material and to start the smoothing process, and then go onto a die grinder, and then I'll finish it off with a sanding attachment. And the same for here. So there's still a little bit more work to do here, but we've made a start. Eventually this will get ceramic coated to try and keep all the heat in. So we've got our manifold all welded up. The next step I'm going to do is the downpipe. So we've got an existing exhaust there, so it's just a matter of joining that into the new one. The old one was a 2.5 inch, which I think may be slightly restrictive with the more horsepower we've got now. So what I'm going to do is put a joiner so that we can easily take off the old 2.5 inch and then build a new 3 inch. That won't happen right now, but may happen in the future. We can see here I've got a 3 inch V-band which will go here, and then we've got a reducer going down to the old 2.5 inch. So that'll get welded in like so. Due to lockdown, I haven't had this up until recently. The other thing we need to do is put in a bung for the O2 sensor. So that's that sensor there, and that'll go into about there. After that's all welded up, we'll get it ceramic coated. We need to do everything we can to stop the heat getting out and melting things like radiator fans and wiring and everything else. We may also wrap it in heat wrap as well. Right, so we've got most of our bits now to do the final assembly. We can see here we've got our manifold that's been ceramic coated. It looks pretty snazzy, pretty happy with it. As that, our downpipe and the turbine housing. So with that, we've been preparing a few other bits and pieces. So when we do rallies, there's a mandated restrictor, which is this piece here. So this restricts the flow into the turbo to about 300 to 350 horsepower. So we're not going to use this when we're doing sprints and hill climbs. So this is machined out of a solid billet. Pretty simple really, but it's got to be very accurate to 36mm in this case. And then it just comes out with a couple of grub screws. And if we come over here, we can see many of the other bits to make it work. Gaskets, water cooling lines, oil cooling lines, wastegate actuators, all our fittings, nuts and bolts. The only thing we've got left to fab is the oil drain pipe, and we're going to do that once the turbo is in place. An important consideration we need to have is bracing the turbo. So the problem we have is we've got all the weight hanging on our studs into the head. Not only the weight, but if we get a whack on the exhaust and that pulls the whole system back, there's only about 50mm between the head studs to keep the whole thing pulling back. Now it's braced back further, but I want to make sure that we brace it properly. So this is what this is for. So this comes down here and then comes up to the back of the manifold. So this gives it a lot of triangulation, which should stop any head studs pulling out of the head. So we've had it on the dyno. It makes lots of power, roughly where we expected. We had a couple of issues, the main one being that the wastegate actuator wasn't stiff enough, or the spring wasn't stiff enough. So that meant we could only run about 12 psi maximum. The pressure in the manifold was just blowing the wastegate open. It's a common problem with these turbos because they've got such a big wastegate but a small wastegate actuator. So that sort of ruined our first dyno session. We put a new heavier spring in it. Now it's running really well, so we've got 230 kilowatts at the wheels restricted and 290 kilowatts unrestricted. We're a bit problematic with our 2.5 inch exhaust. Sort of choked it up top a little bit, but even with the power it's got, it's very fast and I need to get used to it. It's a gravel car, so we'll see how it goes, and then down the track we'll make an exhaust for it. So we've got it on the trailer, we've got a rally sprint tomorrow, we're going to test it out, and we've also got brand new tyres. We've got a fresh wheel alignment, so I'm pretty excited to go and give it a skid and have some fun.